In 1964, 38 New Yorkers watched through their windows as one of their neighbors was brutally murdered. Her name was Kitty Genovese, a 28-year-old woman.
The Genovese incident, where a young woman coming home late at night from her work was assaulted by somebody who was one of those random, crazy people.
Kitty was running up the block, and Winston Moseley ran after her until she reached the midpoint of the block, almost directly under this streetlight. Moseley caught up with her and stabbed her 4 times in the back. Her screams were loud, unmistakable, and reverberated throughout the entire area.
Lights went on in the windows around the courtyard, so we know that people were seeing this. Nobody called the police.
Somebody who lived on the 7th floor opened his window and yelled out, "What's going on down there?" When Moseley heard somebody yelling out, he ran back to his car. Kitty was still alive. She managed to get up. She staggers around the corner here, still screaming. People in that building heard her as well, and she collapses inside this hallway. There's one apartment above there. It was occupied by Carl Ross. Carl opened his door at the time that Moseley returns, and he saw the second attack taking place. And he did nothing.
After stabbing Kitty another 8 times in this very hallway, the killer ran away, leaving Kitty to bleed to death. Eventually, a neighbor called the police, but it was too late. Kitty died before the ambulance could get her to the hospital.
That shocked the city. Now, it's not that a person got murdered that shocked the city. That happens, sadly. It's that a person got murdered and her neighbors watched and nobody did anything. Bibb Latané and I, we read about the murder, as did everybody else. Here we were 2 young social psychologists starting our research careers. We knew about Stanley Milgram's set of experiments on obedience to authority. And we started to think about, in an offhand way, what could have produced the Genovese effect.
Perhaps Kitty Genovese might have been alive today if fewer people had seen her.
There were perhaps 38 people who could have responded, but each were looking to see what these other people were doing.
We decided to try to create a relatively ambiguous situation in which we could see how people responded. We thought that one kind of thing that comes up that's often hard to tell whether it's a real emergency or not has to do with fire.
You see smoke coming through the vent, and it is ambiguous. What do you do?
There's smoke coming out from under the door in that room where I was filling out the questionnaire.
Almost everybody does that if they face the smoke alone. Now let's have you face the smoke with 2 strangers. One person can be seen glancing at the other. The other is continuing to fill out the questionnaire. It's getting a little more smoky in the room, but nonetheless, you stay in the room. By and large, people surrounded by people who react as if there's nothing wrong don't respond. Everybody sees the other people not reacting, so they create a definition of the situation. No emergency.
To test their theories about how groups and individuals respond differently to a crisis, Darley and Latané conducted a second experiment. This time, the emergency was clearly defined.
First of all, I would like to thank the 2 of you for being here today to help out in this study.
In this experiment, one student was asked to communicate via intercom with another student down the hall.
Somebody, give me a little help here, because I'm having a problem. I've got one of these things coming on.
What sounded like a real seizure in the subject's headphones was just a tape recording of an actor playing a role for the experiment.
If somebody would give me a little help, hello? Could somebody help?
If you knew there was nobody else but you to help, you got up, you opened the door of your room, and you headed off to find the person. On the other hand, if there were 3 or 4 other people present who you heard,
I would like to thank the 3 of you for being here today to help us with the study. We are interested in learning.
you are much less likely to respond yourself.
Somebody give me a little help here. I'm having a real problem right now. Help me out.
The responsibility any individual feels for helping is diffused when there are other people who could also help. So what can we say back to the bystanders in the Genovese situation? The first thing we can say, I think, is they got a bum rap. They were reacting the way that you or me might react in those situations. There have been many incidents like the Genovese incident since then, and there have been many incidents in which people who could help don't help.
So we're going to have you answer the questions like you did for the last video, but briefly, I'd like to go ahead and define 2 terms, which we're going to modify the video to actually include this definition directly. But the first is the diffusion of responsibility. And that's the more people that are there, the less responsible any one person feels to help, because they automatically assume that somebody else is going to pick up the slack. So that's a critical understanding, the diffusion of responsibility. The second, he only alluded to briefly, is this concept called group or pluralistic, which is an ugly word, but it means to be more than one, but group ignorance. You know, he said those people, like, they looked out their window and they were looking at their neighbors, and their neighbors were interpreting the event as a non-emergency or as a situation in which help was not required. And they used that information from that first person to kind of figure out what's going on. So group ignorance is when the first people on the scene in a situation like that misinterpret what's going on. They have the wrong idea. And every other subsequent person who arrives later on scene looks at this first group of people, or the current group of people, for social information about what is going on in that scene. But if the information the first people had is wrong, everybody else gets the wrong idea. So.
Those are very important concepts that we'll pick up in a subsequent activity. I would like you, in your groups, to answer these questions or address these questions, but this time you're free to do them in any order you would like. In about 6 minutes, you will be reporting back to the group, but you have a bit more freedom here. Take whatever is most compelling for you and try to deal with all 4, but if you don't get there in 6 minutes, that's not a big deal. Any questions about this activity? Okay, divide into your groups and go for it.
They mentioned Carl Ross. We only called after he called Frank and asked. That's my understanding. There's not a myth, right? I also heard that sexual assault. Different Yeah, he came back one. He came back three attacks. Yeah, over 30 something. He was having impulses. Clearly he's delusional.
Completely aware of the situation, able to observe, and yet they still forward her age.
Think of the looking in the corner, all standing together, it's so visual,
There are always social norms like ours, we had all the time. We were there for like the two yell and scream all the time. There's this understanding that less violence and that's just kind of the behavior of the entire exactly. And that's always the cue though. Even with like my husband will be there like, no, it doesn't sound bad.
Okay, you have a minute and a half.
As a teacher, I'm supposed to report every instance of cheating I've ever seen. Not for the sake of necessarily punishment, but for the sake of creating a record. So where if something really big happens, you know, it's the first time you come to I have a responsibility to explain to them. And then, it's a little different, but it's the same kind of thing. What's your glorified failures? And I would have person, like a kid, like a 3-year-old kid who the wife, the mother trained to call, but she had to see did exactly what the kid was doing. Somebody wrinkles that we remember the wrinkles. Well, there's the research shows that. Well, then we're changing the world and we have evidence to show.
Okay. Okay, your time is up. We know that you would like to go on and on. By the way, after we finish this, we will break for lunch. This is up to you. Is any group what would you like to share? What were the key takeaways for you? Yes, Danielle?
I think one thing I was kind of talking about with my group, and I feel like it was really interesting, was the smoke coming into the room, because those people were supposedly, I mean, if it's fire, I mean, you could get sick by having, inhaling a lot of smoke, that they themselves were in danger and they weren't doing anything. I could, and especially with the bystander effect, I was saying, if they're watching another room and seeing that room fill up with smoke and a ton of people in there and them not do anything, that kind of goes along with it. But they themselves were supposed to be in danger and they didn't do anything, which I found extremely interesting, because they wouldn't help themselves.
No, that's a great point. And we have a longer video specifically outlining more footage of a follow-up of that experiment. It's in our conformity materials, but it's based on a real-life situation. There's actually was a fire in Woolworths in England, I believe. I'm not sure what year, but they found out that everybody managed to evacuate the big department store fairly safely, except for everybody in the restaurant that was attached died. And they wondered what was going on in the situation. And they eventually concluded that all of the people who had failed to leave the restaurant had yet to pay their bill. So it was actually a real-life situation paralleling the video we just watched where people died.
And that's what I think social psychologists call, you have a script. Yeah. And you're scripted, and you're on automatic pilot, and that's your script. Yeah. So as Brian said, it borders, this is you can see conformity within the bystander.
There was a fire at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas about 10 years ago, and something similar happened. It started up several stories high, and the police and firemen were trying to get everyone to leave the casino, which was on the bottom floor, and a lot of the people who were there didn't go. They were engaged in gambling and wanted to finish their bet or whatever they were doing, or their poker game, and they all died in the fire because there's such cheap plastic glitter and stuff in a casino that that fire just tore through there.
Yeah, that's a great example. I'm going to look that up now.
It's true.
No. It's a more modern example, and it's in this country. I'll go through the middle. I got it.
Okay.
Guard your drinks. Thank you.
Just to follow up on the scripts and conformity, Dr. Zimbardo mentions the Chinese hall monitor who actually didn't leave, was facing safety because it was his job, his obligation to ensure the safety of the children. So it shows how it can go either way, right? It's all about how we interpret the situation and what our social role is.
And I'd like to say about scripts, in some way we are re-scripting young people, giving them a new script that they can follow. So as Chris said, it can go both ways. In addition, a point that Dr. Zimbardo often makes is that once you understand social situations, challenging situations, and the dynamics behind them, you're obligated to act in a way that you weren't previously obligated out of ignorance.
And one thing you'll see as we go into the later activities after lunch is that you have the flexibility to some extent to decide what script you like. What is your preferred way of generally dealing with these situations? And if you realize that your automatic script sometimes includes behavior that you're not comfortable with, you can identify that, be aware of it, and begin to seek to change it. So it's not that you're necessarily locked into these scripts because they're forced upon you. It's that you're locked into these scripts because you're not aware of them. Thank you.
Like, I know along the lines with these scripts, when I was 16, I was trained as a lifeguard and EMT, and I've been in a situation before where one of my friends was drowning, and there was no point where it was like thinking, should I help this person? It was like, hey, I know what to do, and just instantly went and helped. And I feel like that's kind of what we're giving these kids through this program is like, oh, I see the situation happening. It's not even thinking about it. It's like automatically, hey, I know what to do in this situation. I've been trained in this, and that's really awesome.
That is a fantastic point. Again, we actually teach kids that people who have had CPR training, people who have had first responder training, are inherently, or on average, much more likely to respond appropriately to that kind of situation. So it's our hope that by watching some of the bystander effect videos and by being trained in the bystander effect, that it will also affect their behavior in a similar way. So that's part of the logic behind how the intervention works, is that they feel like they have the skills to adequately deal with it and they know what to do. So that's a fantastic way of talking about it.
And Jason's point also is a great segue into the next part, which is all about change and learning how to change both the situation, yourself, and others.